Boom, this hangout on air is live. So yeah, cool. So we just talked about it for a split second there, but I found you through Wilder, which is that outdoor marketplace for women that they were starting. If you could just give me a little bit more background on you, kind of how you got started in, it seems like a very eclectic background of a lot of different aspects of art, and then kind of like how you decided to get into the schools of sustainability that you started right now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess, a lot of this goes back to what I was studying in school. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design and studied industrial design. And I was always just kind of branching out a lot, doing a lot of different genres and different, just trying different things out, really. But industrial design, I felt like kind of set me up, even though I didn't decide that I wanted to be an industrial designer, because there were some other sort of ethical dilemmas for me with that. I did realize that what that study did was, well, it really is trying to enable you to envision something that doesn't exist and then find a way to show that to someone else, right? And so that's a big part of that is, right, sketching, conceptualizing things, and being able to do it really fast. And usually the things that they're setting you up to conceptualize start with some kind of problem, right? Some kind of like break in the flow of life, in what makes things either enjoyable or convenient or easy. And so what that kind of does, I think, if you're really, if you're really into that, I mean, you start to look at, well, okay, well, where are the problems? And that eventually leads you to some of the most wicked problems of the planet. And, some of those being extreme poverty, people not having access to clean water, lack of proper sanitation around the world, some of the basic needs that aren't being met for billions of people. And and then, of course, I would say the largest problem of all, which includes all of us, is that the way that our current social, economic, cultural systems are set up predominantly are not sustainable for the planet that we have. And so, over the course of just years coming out of school, I mean, I graduated in 2008 and it's now 2016. And we started SOS 2 years ago, in 2014. And, it's one of those projects that you don't intend to do, which seems to kind of be a trend for me. It's just like you're doing your thing and all of a sudden here comes somebody or something that is like a perfect fit for the time. And that happened to be a friend of mine. Her name was Marika Ramsden, and she and I had been working at a camp, an environmental education camp, in Northern California. And that's a place where you're taking kids around, hiking with them in the forest, talking about your relationship to that, right? Just exploring, having fun, making that connection with the earth. And then if they're interested, diving into things a little bit. But of course that brings up, stewardship for the planet. And the two of us happen to be more so maybe than others working there, interested in sustainability on a whole. Like, how is our camp doing in terms of that? What's happening with these kids when they leave the camp and go back to their schools? And so she approached me and she was like, hey, I did this bike trip once through the UK where I visited schools and I gave this workshop on sustainability and was like collecting ideas from kids, and I'm thinking about, what maybe I could do that in California, and maybe you could help me make, a film out of it. And, so at that moment, I kind of realized she was asking me to go on a really long bike trip. And I thought that sounded like an awesome idea. And so, we that was the first stage, was really, that was the project to start with, was we're going to go on a bike trip. We're going to visit schools. we're going to give this workshop that we, really honed in on, that we felt like was trying to open them up to the idea of sustainability, just to even what that word means, but then also to showing them that if they approach it in the right way, it could be one of the most creative, meaningful things in their life, that could be a lifelong adventure for them. And so, at the end of that whole process, we then, and there's a lot more that goes into this we can talk about. It's kind of still the ending of the first question, but at the end of that process, we give them cameras, right? And they capture the ideas that they've been working on. And those ideas could be for the future of the planet, or for more sustainable school, or something that, just some weird idea that they have for the future that they think would be cool. And so what happened was that through the course of that phase, we cycled the entire length of California, and that was a crazy, crazy trip. That was extremely fun and very challenging. And one of the biggest challenges was that there was only two of us, and, we're cycling every day. Almost every day we're giving workshops in schools, we're camping out. There's a lot that goes into that, and there's not a whole lot of time and energy left for making a film.
Definitely.
Yeah. So part of what happened is that, we kind of realized through the trip, not only is like making a film right now not quite possible, even though we're capturing a lot of footage and the kids were capturing footage themselves, but also the whole idea, it sort of like opened up a doorway. It was like, oh wow, this is amazing. Like, these kids love doing this. They are extremely enthusiastic and like creative and imaginative when you just approach the topic the right way. And it felt a little almost, it felt too narrow to be talking about sustainability, to be making a film about sustainability among youth, and those youth only be from, say, 26 schools in California.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So obviously this is a global thing that includes every race and culture. And so if we're going to make a film, it just kind of felt like, well, it should encapsulate that diversity of that voice. And so that's kind of where it's grown from, is realizing that, oh, we need to make this film, and it can be a feature length film where we travel the world visiting some of the most sustainably set up examples of schools around the world, or educational experiments. And there's a number of ways that I feel that happens. And there's more to it now too. There's a whole web platform aspect. Yeah.
Awesome. So to back up just a little bit, you had kind of mentioned like the fact that the project had kind of just sprouted, and it wasn't really planned. And I think a lot of things in my life have happened in a very similar way. So kind of before that had presented itself, what role did sustainability kind of play in your life? How did that come to more of an awareness for yourself? And how did you start to kind of weave in your artistic abilities in film into that, in order to kind of like, start playing with what that looked like together?
Sure. Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, I guess it kind of like, it's one of those things that's kind of hard to say specifically, because it's like your life, it has all of these things that are happening, and they all lead into the next one, and they're all connected. And it's hard to say like where something actually happened, and where it didn't. It's kind of, I can definitely give some moments, and but it is hard to say exactly where something like that happens. It's just like a wave, right? And and all of a sudden you find yourself in it, and so I would say though that it did start with school and like thinking about that stuff. And one of my projects at SCAD in college was my thesis actually was around composting toilets for Ethiopia. I was looking at, I was really interested in just in that program because I was seeing like, oh, like, this is about like trying to make things better. And like, if I wanted to make something better, it felt like there were more valuable things to do than make like a more ergonomic knife, or like make more effective lawn equipment or whatever. It's just like,
Hmm.
I'm not sure that that is really what I want to be doing. And so this project was looking at, okay, well, this country has the highest death rate from cholera. And cholera is when you ingest coliform bacteria right from human feces, and you just essentially like shit yourself to death. That's a terrible way to die,
Yeah,
and
quite.
and it was, and so I was researching that, and I found that they had a really high groundwater level pretty much across the whole country. And on top of that, the most common toilet that they used was a pit latrine. And so it seemed as though there was leaching happening from pit latrines into their groundwater content. And so I thought, well, maybe we could, develop this system. And so that was just, being in school and thinking about that kind of stuff. And then as I left school, I moved to London for a little while, and I think the city kind of depressed me, and I was just thinking about that stuff I was reading, right? Just reading lots, and it was kind of, my eyes were kind of being opened to a lot of what the world doesn't tell you it is, and so I moved to New York, and being in these two big cities kind of took its toll on me. I realized like I was lacking some serious connection, and
Hmm.
I decided that I needed to leave. I needed to go to the West Coast, and I felt a draw, and I think really what it's about is like, if you have a feeling in your gut about something, whether it's because it like scares you a little maybe, or because it feels exciting. I think both of those are equally important to follow. So I think that means there's some opportunity for learning, for growth there. And I think if you're following that, you're kind of in the flow of things, right? You're in the wave, um, and I think it just kind of leads you naturally to things that are exciting for you. And in terms of sustainability specifically, as I moved out, I was living in a bus. I was trying to run my bus on waste vegetable oil, which I did successfully and about until Colorado, all the way from the East Coast, and and then I moved on to some forested land. I guess there's a spot in that story that's missing. That we when I was traveling over in my bus, again the same thing happened. Like that some friends called me up, and out of the blue, nothing I expected, we ended up making a film. They said, "Hey, look, we live in California, and they're closing state parks, and we hate our jobs. They're sucking our souls, and we feel like, what if we know you're coming over in your bus? What if we travel in your bus, went to all these state parks, and made a documentary about this thing that's happening that nobody knows about?" And so that was kind of my first like real foray into being a filmmaker. I had worked in film in different ways, and making props and working on set and stuff, but I had never actually been making films myself. And so we set out. We traveled. As an introduction to California for me, we traveled to 70 state parks and just captured the beauty of these places. And that might have been the most direct link, a connection with the earth and filmmaking, and not only a connection with the earth, but something that has to do with how we're interacting with it, right? And that it didn't feel right to be shutting these places down on a lot of levels, and that film could actually be a tool for bringing awareness, bringing change, and it didn't feel real to me until we made that film and it had an effect, and so that kind of, I think, just led me into where I'm now, into this sort of like blend of like filmmaking and adventure and like stewardship of the earth, sustainability. But again, I never expected that it would I would be doing this project, School of Sustainability, and it would be becoming what it is now. It's all just kind of like unknown.
Definitely. So that's really cool. And I had checked out. It's called what was that? What was the film called again? 70 something 70.
Yeah, the first 70.
The first 70. Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
put that in the show notes just in case. So if you have anything else as we kind of keep talking, let me know and I can make sure to include it there. So there's some links up. But yeah, so
Okay. Sure.
that's really cool. So there's that level of film that you're trying to incorporate kind of in the schools of sustainability stuff. Um, what else are you kind of trying to mold into that project, and how do you see it as kind of more of an overarching thing moving forward? Obviously, that's a portion of it. How are you kind of trying to create that as kind of a plan, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So kind of what we see it as now is that there's sort of three areas to it. There's what it started with, which was sort of like the combination of workshops in classrooms, in schools, and then film, right? And how these two things could kind of blend together. And that the workshops themselves were about kids kind of learning to make film, learning to tell their story, on top of, right, of thinking about sustainability and brainstorming, using their imagination, which they already have, right? It's just sort of
Mm-hmm.
giving an outlet for that in a meaningful way for them to use it, and then providing a way for them to share that, to share what they are imagining. And so there's those two aspects still, and then there's this sort of third area which kind of ties it all together, really, in this weird way, right? It's and I say weird way because it's like it's it's based on the internet. It's a web platform, so it's this like very like technological opportunity that we have right now that we're like trying to work within towards a better relationship with the planet. But we have thought about it a lot, and it's something that comes back to me often, like, is this the right way to do it? And I guess you're not really sure until you try, right? And you put it out there. But so the idea is that we're going to travel and make this film, which is going to showcase some of the most forward-thinking examples, right, around the planet, and in terms of sustainability. And that kind of breaks down in three ways. And I sort of categorize those by these taglines. So we have the explicit, right? And explicit means that the school is explicitly using sustainability as their curriculum, right? It's very obvious. It's very outwardly sustainable. So an example of that would be like a place here in California, not too far from me, called Weaving Earth. And they are teaching about relationship to place, and place, of course, being planet Earth. And so the way they do that is essentially by connecting people to the environment that they're within, to understanding the environment that they're within, by existing, by really being in it. So being outside, learning, what is this local ecology that I'm around? How are these plants helping the other parts of the web that they're within? How are they useful for me? Right. And then what are these animals that are around me, doing? And like, how can I understand them? Like bird language and tracking, how to prepare food from the wild, right? How to forage, how to do, ecoforestry in a way that's creating more diversity. So like lots of these kinds of things, right? Really explicitly teaching about how to live on the planet in a way that is creating more thriving systems as opposed to depleting ones. And the next category I call implicit, which is to say, like, the curriculum is a little bit more implicit in the environment. So the school may not necessarily be teaching this kind of stuff about like the planet and Earth and these sort of like far out there, teachings or like teachings, but they may have set up their school location in a way, that is using as sustainable practices as possible, right? Closing cycles, closing loops. So like an example would be Green School in Bali. They have built their school bamboo, right? They have like over 50 buildings. Some of them are huge, and they're all built from bamboo, sustainably sourced. They have their own farm that's organics, a permaculture farm, that all their food, for the most part, for the students that are there that are eating, they're helping grow them themselves. They have aquaculture, they have aquaponics, they have natural swimming pools. They have having fun with their teachers to wrestle around in. They have a big focus on art and music. They have the solar powered and hydro powered. So there's just, the composting, all these things that they're doing in their campus, all these decisions that the teachers and the school are making are, invisibly teaching the kids. The kids are gleaning all kinds of information from the landscape. And this actually connects into one of the quotes that I feel most dominantly representing kind of what we're doing. And it comes from one of my favorite authors. His name is David Orr. All right, David W. Orr. And he talks about how we're inherently and intrinsically connected with our landscape, and that by us shaping our landscape, right, that landscape is shaping our mindscape. And so that's how I feel about schools that could be doing this, that they could literally be teaching and shaping the minds of kids just by how they're shaping their landscapes, right? And so that's why gardens are such a great thing in schools. So much learning that happens there. And then the other category, which is the last one, which is a little bit more obscure, but I think just as relevant and important, is really about creativity, right? And so we're looking at an example called DIY is probably the primary one to use for this, but DIY.org, they are an organization and a web platform based out of San Francisco, but they ultimately what they're doing is creating a place where kids can go online and share creative projects that they're working on. And they can learn skills. I think one of their mottos is learn skills, be awesome. And if kids are learning practical skills, if they're learning to motivate themselves and create something and share that and find value in that, then ultimately they're doing something that is intrinsically motivated. And if a kid is motivated to be learning, right? If they're learning how to learn and they're using their creativity, I mean, that's what we need is kids that are extremely creative, critical thinkers that can look at, all of these issues that are going to be coming our way, problems or whatever that we're going to be dealing with, and figure out, okay, how do I, take this and make it something that, could be functional? How can I think creatively about this or critically and solve this? And so, and then on top of that, I think if we have kids that are engaged in then they're going to be interested in wanting to keep doing that, right? They're not going to be checking out of reality. They're going to be there. They're going to be aware of what's going on. And the belief is that if they're there and they're aware of what's going on and they're enjoying what they're doing, they're going to want to keep it going, right? They're going to need a place, environment to keep doing these things that they're enjoying doing, to keep having, the life that they're having. And that, I feel, ultimately leads to a desire to steward the earth, to take care of it in a way that can allow for that to happen. And so, we're looking at that. That one in particular is such a great example. And it's inspired a lot of what we're trying to do with our web platform. Our web platform just happens to be a little bit more geared towards sustainability. It's just basically saying, hey, like, how can, what kind of ideas do you have, towards sustainability? Here are all these principles that can allow us to think about how this relates to how we live. And, you know, here's some examples that other kids have come up with. And the idea is that if they see their peers sharing ideas for the future, ideas that benefit other people and the planet, that hopefully they would be inspired, maybe not necessarily by the, like, you know, moral, ethical implications of that or social responsibility, but possibly just by the creative aspect of, like, getting to share your idea. And so kind of to incentivize that even more, the whole web platform is like a game. So we're setting it up so that with each idea that they share, they're going to gain points in one of the categories of sustainability, whether that's sustainable water systems or sustainable transportation or, you know, local and organic food, right? And on top of that, there'll be challenges. We're going to set up challenges for them that they could complete and gain a certain amount of points for that. So that'll allow kids that maybe I don't really understand what is like fair trade mean, or, you know, like what is local economy? How do I, and equity, how do I think within that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they might be too young. But if they see some example challenges, it might get them going, give them an idea, and then it gets them in the game too, right? So all of a sudden we're turning, you know, what was originally like potentially one of the greatest problems of our planet, which is the future, you know, of humans living on it, into a game, right? And that's a big part of it, is that we don't know if this is going to work, you know, or anything that anybody's doing is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we like come from that position, you know, and if we're trying, like really trying hard to make it work, and it's just like not enjoyable, you know, but it's like, we got to do it because that just feels unnecessary. That feels like, what's the point? But if we can do it in a way where it's like, hey, this is fun regardless, well, then that, you know, that's worth it in itself, even if it doesn't play out. Right? So the process itself is kind of what we're really aiming at. And if it leads to more sustainable practices, to more, you know, conscious individuals about how their life connects with the earth, then that's great. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So it kind of like what you had mentioned with challenges. And I know it, from what I had looked up, you came from the Midwest. I actually grew up in Wisconsin. My childhood, and I think a lot of people around us in the Midwest, it seemed like there wasn't really that focus of kind of what you're trying to implement with children growing up. And it seems like, from my perspective, it would have been awesome to have had some of that information kind of distilled at a younger age, because it skips this whole middle ground of like your teenage years where you're kind of confused and you're trying to figure things out. And, you know, some people end up coming back to learning how to help others or help the earth, or, you know, do things that are a little bit more based on morality. And then there's also, you know, a lot of people that end up getting caught in the rat race and they don't really ever end up getting out of it. What kind of challenges are you seeing trying to bring this to children? Because I think there's a lot of people that have the idea that children are incapable of kind of thinking about these things in a bigger picture. But I also think that they don't fully give them the chance, you know. So what kind of challenges are coming up as you're trying to implement these programs, and like kind of spread it throughout a younger generation?
Sure. Yeah. I would say there's like a number of areas to that question. That's a really good one. And that's something that's a constant challenge for us, right? That we're like going to have to keep adapting to, like, as we go and as we figure it out. You know, and one of the most basic initial challenges is just that, you know, the way that our school system is set up is based on age, right? I mean, our school systems, there's a lot that goes into that, really, that for me isn't quite set up for this thing, you know, and a lot of it is because you know, it's based on a very old model. You know, our school system is essentially an industrial model of education, and that's ultimately what we're trying to move away from, right? That's what we're transitioning out of. Yet our school systems are still really there, even on like the most fundamental levels that maybe don't seem that relevant. That, you know, kids are grouped based on age, not on like their social development, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or cognitive development. And that's the same as a product line, that they're all based on data manufacture, and they go through from one stage to the next. And if they don't, you know, make the protocol, well, then they, you know, they get kind of kicked out of the system, essentially. The
Mm-hmm.
system doesn't quite work for them. And it's a very limited range of information that's being taught, really, when you think about it. And so I think, you know, one of the basic issues is that when we go into a classroom, we're dealing with such a range of, you know, cognitive and social levels. And so, you know, not every kid is going to have like a great idea. Not every kid is going to have something that people are going to want to like look at and be like, that's amazing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But in about every class, there's at least one kid, you know, maybe two, that you're like, wow, holy crap, I can't believe you came up with that, you know. And if you just think about that on a large scale, that's really amazing, right? And you know, and so I guess the other challenge really is the difficulty in getting, you know, of how we look at educating children, because our system is so, you know, it's just so it's one of those things. It's like a speedboat, you know. And this is a metaphor that a friend of mine used to use about what's going on with the planet, you know. And I feel it can be applied to a lot of things. In this case, it can be applied to our school systems, in that, you know, it's like you're in a speedboat and you've taken off on the water, and the speedboat, you know, is developing this wave behind you, and you're like, oh shit, there's a wave behind me. I need to get away from the wave. So you go faster to get away from the wave, but the wave gets bigger behind you, and you just keep going faster. And eventually you're going to run out of fuel, and the wave is going to come over the top of you from the back. Right. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that's happening, you know, for a lot of these big systems that we've started. They're cruising along, and they don't feel like they can stop, because it's going to really, you know, mess everyone up. And so it's trying to find a way to like slow the boat down, you know. It's trying to find a way to slow, so we can change directions, really.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like working in like little things here and there. And I think there definitely feels like there's a lot more momentum for it now. And certainly the momentum feels more in, you know, certain places, like in particular for me here in California. I feel like there's a lot of momentum. But even California, compared to other places around the world, are just so far behind. And then, of course, the Midwest, you know, and other states that are a little slower to take on to new progressive ideas are just like way in the back, you know. And certainly I didn't have any of this exposure when I was a kid, like to these ideas. And it, you know, granted, it wasn't as huge of a topic then, but certainly, you know, I wasn't like sitting, you know, outside around a fire singing songs. You know, maybe I went to camp, you know, for a summer, and people weren't talking about, you know, that you can use your food waste, and they certainly weren't looking at, you know, how is it possible for kids to have ideas that could change the world. And so, you know, I think kind of what we're hoping is that because of where we are now with the internet, because it's so connected, you know, and that by the year 2020, it's estimated that like 5 billion people are going to be connected. I think a lot of those are going to be kids, you know, and there's been some experiments, you know, done. Like another thing that we actually want to have in the film is this experiment done by Sugata Mitra, who is the recent TED Prize Wish winner. And he did this project called Hole in the Wall, where he put a computer in a hole in a wall in a slum in India.
Mm-hmm.
And these kids could come over. That at height for kids to use. And these kids would come over. They didn't know anything about it. They'd never seen one of these things before, never used one. And they would just over a relatively short amount of time, figure everything out with it, essentially, that they needed to. And he was being blown away by the types of information that kids were just learning on their own, right? And so it's just showing that if the opportunity is there for them to explore on their own, and if the interest is there, then there's not really a limit to what can be done. That, like, kids are very, very capable, very quick learners, and can be very, very motivated and very inspired, right? And so I guess the hope is that because of this availability now, that we can reach places a little bit easier, even if, like, there's a kid that's in a school environment where no one else in the whole school is not thinking about this. He might find this and be able to access it and be a part of a network, be a part of a group of people that he feels inspired by. And we are doing some other development for curriculum to go into schools that can accompany, and this is where it all kind of ties together, is that, the film is going to be a part of a curriculum package that can go into a school that will ultimately lead them to developing ideas for their school campus, or, for their local community, that they can then share on the web platform. The film is kind of helping, not only in the beginning for us to gain some of our, like, initial user base on the platform, but also as a motivational and an inspirational tool to get kids inspired to, like, hey, yeah, I want to share something on that platform too.
Awesome. It seems like a big part of kind of the entire project that might be kind of like hanging out in the background is related to fear. Is there any kind of correlation that you see with kids, as far as, like, if somebody has an idea and kind of brings it forth, and then there's kind of like this hive mind thing going on of, like, oh, well, that couldn't work, or, like, this is stupid because of this. And I think, not only could there be that involved with kids, but maybe also for yourself trying to take on, a school system that's been relatively unchanged for quite a long time. I'm imagining there's got to be quite a bit of pushback to that. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of the first question there, which is maybe dealing with the kids more, and fear, is that, yeah, that's something that, we kind of approach that with them in the workshop, because, we realize that really what we're doing is opening them up to, where things are possibly going. And that can be very scary, right? And I think what can happen a lot is that, you can kind of shut down from something like that because of fear, because you feel like, that's way too much for me to take on as a single person, or my ideas aren't going to be good enough for this kind of thing. And one of the things that we like to relate to them, have you ever seen the movie Cloud Atlas?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that movie has a lot of great messages for our time. And there's a line in there that I like to share in the workshops with kids, because I feel like it's really relevant and it's really powerful. And it has to do with that moment when the son-in-law of the slave plantation owner comes back, and he's been, his life has been saved by a self-freed slave, and he's just like, I can't do this, like, my life was saved by a slave, like, I'm not gonna stand over the top of them and like control them and and have them slaves. And the guy's response is, the plantation owner's response is, he's essentially talking about what we're talking about. He's saying, the world has a natural order to things. Like, there's a lot of momentum and movement behind essentially what's already going on. And if you try to go against that, you're going to get, your life is going to be hell, maybe, or you're going to have a lot of resistance. And he words it differently, right? But I'm kind of paraphrasing here. But he, he's just saying, like, your life is not, no matter what you do, it's not going to amount to but just a single drop in a limitless ocean. And the son-in-law's response is, what is an ocean but a multitude of drops?
Hmm.
And I just thought that's just such a perfect, you know, uh, visual, that that's all we are really. And, even though we may just be one drop, and that's all the ocean is made up of, and if one drop is going to change, it's going to be in, relation with how many other drops every moment, thousands, right? And, it changes, the numbers change a little bit for us as humans, but still, we can see that if you influence just one other drop that is around you in your network, right, then all of a sudden their network around them of drops of humans is expanded, right? And they might influence one or two, and that's how it spreads, right? And that's how something changes. That's how, a drop of color dye will change an entire glass of water, right? It just takes one drop, and ultimately it's going to spread, hopefully, across the whole thing. And and then it also, we tack into, the idea that, this doesn't have to be something scary, or, and it's scary because it's looked at as a problem, but if we look at this as an opportunity, as something that we could use our imaginations, our creativity in the most meaningful way possible, literally, like we have the opportunity to be superheroes, that's, it's an incredible opportunity. And, that turns it into an adventure, into something that's exciting, into something that's fun. And now, we're not dealing with, fear of failure, because it's just a game, right? It's and if you're playing it as a game, usually you're going to be much more effective at it, because your mind's not blocked by these constant thoughts of it's not good enough, it's not going to work.
Definitely. And it seems like you're kind of intertwining some more Buddhist-esque teachings into some of the kind of lessons that you're trying to give the kids. Are there specific tools that you try and give them in order to kind of navigate more of like what they're trying to do? Because it almost seems like, as a, not even necessarily as a child, but even as an adult, you come to some aspects in life or decisions that you have to make where you get a little scared, or you don't fully understand how to navigate through something, and you kind of need either somebody else there to kind of help you understand where you're trying to go, or some type of meditation type thing, which I had seen in one of the videos that you had put up. Is there anything like that the kids are kind of being taught in order to couple more of the school of sustainability ideas that you're bringing forth, and then being able to keep them thinking in that same way and being more understanding with their peer group moving forward?
Yeah, it's hard, because we there's so much we could teach them,
Yeah.
and we generally have like, maybe like a half day, maybe 2 half days with them,
A half day to
and
change the world.
yeah, so it's always a challenge. What's the most important stuff to get in here? How do we fit it all in,
Yeah.
in a way that's not like overloading them? And certainly mindfulness, is a really important tool. And that's something that we think is another great mode of teaching, of experience that could be happening in schools. And one of the, I would say, we do play some games that are hopefully providing perspectives. I would say the tool that we probably provide the most is perspective, offering a way of thinking about things that could hopefully be a seed for them to continue certain threads of thought that might lead them to developing these tools on their own, and on some occasions we adapt our workshop to different classes depending on their age and where they're at as a group of humans. But one of the things that we do is play some games that that really bring back messages of, would it have been as fun if you just stood on the sidelines and didn't participate, and
Mhm.
the answer is always obvious to them, like, no, it was only fun if we played, and that's kind of what we're looking at, is that we have a game that's being presented to us, and it's time for us to take that risk to jump in and to play the game.
Mhm.
And then one of the other things that we like to do sometimes is kind of a tool. Has to do with kind of harnessing our imagination and with creating story, with visualizing story. Because a big part of what's happening here is that we're really kind of trying to help guide them into a place where they're going into their world, right? They're going into their set of tools that we're all born with, which is our creativity and our critical thinking. Like, it is there. It's just a matter of using it and of seeing, of like opening that door a little bit to it. But sometimes it's hard to translate that, to communicate that to someone else in a way that is engaging, and so one of the tools that we've been sort of playing around with, trying to help them, is to take that place of creativity, of ideas, and turn it into story, right? Of essentially of story building. And so sometimes we go through this process of like dropping them in, and I walk them through a little bit of a kind of a meditative, like, story visualization process where they get to really go into their mind's eye and just like, look at things, essentially look at what's going on in there, and follow their sensations through their mind. And so sometimes I think that that happens, and that might help them to continue on in some way with this into the future. And it's so hard to know, I guess, really, with such a short amount of time. And I guess the hope is that ultimately it'll be continuing based on their peer-to-peer inspiration, because they have other kids that are doing this, that they see, kind of like we have in our like social spheres. We're inspired by our peers that are doing cool things, that are coming up with cool ideas, just hoping that that'll happen with them. And if they just start that at a young age, that'll just kind of become what they're doing as part of themselves, and not maybe as much like, oh, that's a creative person there and I'm not, but like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm a part of this, and I have just different ideas.
That's kind of what I've tried to explain to people too, is that creativity doesn't necessarily just exist in the art world itself. It can exist, in whatever inspires you and whatever is kind of like coming out that you enjoy and are, passionate about trying to make better as a skill in yourself. And props to you, dude, because it seems like you're really tackling a ton of different stuff in one situation in a very short amount of time. And that just seems like an insane thing to be able to walk into and kind of like confidently handle in a half day. Like,
Yeah, it's kind
how
of crazy.
how does that happen? How do you kind of go about creating these lessons in a fun way? Because I mean, clearly it has to have came from some sort of background that you've worked with kids before. Because there's it seems like there's a lot of people that have come into this space before, and they are trying to impart this same type of knowledge, but they come at it with a structure that is incredibly similar to the school structure that's already in place that isn't working. So how do you kind of like come into a classroom where, say, there might be a couple kids that just don't want to participate, they're not into it, they're problem students, whatever? Like, how do you come in and kind of adapt to the situation that's going on and then tailor what you're doing to them to better help them?
Mm, right. Yeah, it's it's an interesting question. I mean, it's I've had certainly experience working with kids quite a bit in the past, and I think it's one of those things I've always really enjoyed working with kids, because they can just like tap into that place
Yeah.
so easily. And I love being in that place and being an artist. Like, that's like being able to tap into the place of play, you know, um, is what I'm attempting to do, like as a life practice, and
Mhm.
kids just can do it naturally, and I guess that's kind of what happens, is that a lot of our school systems and our cultural systems are ultimately working us out of tapping into that place naturally all the time. And so it is certainly kind of a strange thing, because sometimes we're going into these school settings and we're doing things that in a completely different way, maybe, that may not, it always kind of comes up for me if there's like a teacher there, or a parent chaperone, like, I wonder how they're viewing this. Do they view it as like worthy of, like, us being here, and do they see it as like, kind of ridiculous?
Mhm.
um but I think what it is that, if you have, like, it's just for me personally, um I've always felt that I've found in my life it's much easier to really make a connection with somebody if they're enjoying themselves,
Mhm.
if they are, and if they're laughing, right? I mean, because we're human, right? Which means that we're ultimately humorous beings, and if you are tapping into that place where you're looking at the humorous aspects of what it means to be alive, all of a sudden, it takes off that serious edge a little bit of, like, this is something that I have to know, and it turns it into something like, hey, should I know this? Like, do I want to think about this? It
Mhm.
just opens it up as an opportunity and not as like a necessity, and I think that's kind of where, school has these very linear pathways. A lot of schools do, not all of them, of course, but these very linear pathways where it's like, you need to do this, that's just the way it is. We've set that up, and it's gonna be for the good for you, and I think that a lot of times that's really difficult, for kids. And I know sometimes it was difficult for me growing up, especially, like, I think that what saved me, was that I was always constantly doing art on the side,
Mhm.
and I was just really interested in that. And it wasn't, my schools had opportunities for that, but they weren't necessarily like really promoting that, and yeah. So I think certainly one of the things that we're up against there is just uh, how the perception of teachers and schools is set up, to what education is. And uh, one of my collaborator on this project, co-founder Marika,
Mhm.
she's been so critical in all of this, in this, like, curriculum development stuff. I mean, a lot of the workshop that we give, she came from a workshop that she had developed previously when she was cycling through the UK to schools, and she just has, like, a really incredible mind for, like, finding ways to engage students, uh, where they're really participating, and it's very game like way, and that's a big part of it. Is it's not about us up there lecturing. It's
Mhm.
about them participating together, having hopefully some epiphany moments, coming to their own realizations. And we, every now and then we insert these little tidbits of perspective back to them, but for the most part, that's kind of what we're after. um, and I think the two of us working at an environmental education camp, which is very much geared towards, let's get kids outside having fun, and through these activities and playing games. A big part of that is just very game oriented. That then you use the game for talking points, for because they've had a visceral experience with it, and now they've connected with it. But if you're
Mhm.
just talking at them, you know intellectually, there's no connection to them, so they're not going to understand in their bones. They're just in most cases going to tune out. um, yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it totally does. You mentioned the epiphany moment. Do you think there's any, or have you seen that kind of happen in any kids where they're kind of engaging in what you're trying to show them or teach them, and you you can kind of tell that something's changed and they've kind of got it. Because I think there's also on the flip side, there's a point where people in their life kind of just give up, where they get to a point, and they've tried all these different things and it's not working, and society just kind of keeps telling them what they're doing is not working. And eventually they just kind of stop because they don't really have anybody to give them the permission to keep going, which I think is a huge reason why a lot of people don't continue pursuing the things that they enjoy, is because they're waiting for someone else to tell them that it's okay to keep doing it instead of just going after it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. We have definitely seen it. You know, we we still get letters from some of the kids that we visited on our bike trip. And I think it has to do with, you know, it has to do with the way that it's presented, in that, you know, we're showing them that this is an opportunity, or we're trying to set it up so that they see it themselves as an opportunity. And, you know, some of these kids that get into this, you know, we've had feedback from teachers that say, you know, this kid is usually very quiet, is usually not very engaged in what's going on. And like, I just saw this kid light up and was just like on fire, you know, when you guys were here, and like continues to be super excited about it and is like pushing for it. And that's just, you know, we've had that happen on many occasions. And even if it happens just once, you know, that's what we were telling ourselves on our bike trip, you know, like, even if we are able to just empower and affect one kid in that way, you know, then it's all worth it. Like, the whole thing has been worth it. And that kind of thing certainly is like, that's one of those things about the project that, like, really, I think gives us like fire in the heart, you know, is seeing when that happens for a kid. Because it just can change their whole world, you know. And if you have a kid that's like that, I mean, that kid is gonna, you know, inspire all kinds of people around them. So yeah, it definitely happens. And, you know, I really don't see too many kids closing off from this. And I think the reason is that, unlike a lot of what they're doing in school, it actually connects, very directly how it connects to the future of their life, you know. And there's a lot of stuff that's going on in their school where it's not really clear as to how this pertains or relates to their life.
Mm-hmm.
But they can see that this is, you know, this is thinking about, you know, them in a sense, right? And I think that is a really, really powerful for them, and it adds that level of interest and engagement for just about all of them, you know. There's only been maybe a few occasions where we've seen, you know, a kid or two that is just kind of a little bit apathetic, and it's hard for me to say, you know, if that was just because of them being in this like routine of like having information pushed down their throats, and not really feeling like it relates to them, you know, and just kind of maybe it, you know, feeling like it's part of the same thing, or yeah, I don't know. But generally it's just like almost 100%. Yeah, they're excited and engaged. And so it's been, and that's another reason I think the project has grown, because it's, you know, we didn't start with this grand idea that it was going to be this, but it's really for us that we can just see that it seems like it wants to happen, you know, and it feels like kids want this. And so, you know, now that's what's like pulling us to want to try to create even more opportunity for other kids around the world to experience.
How do you have anything in place for kids? So, like, you know, there's a couple of them that might connect a little bit more with what you're trying to do than others. Are there ways that they can kind of come back to your platform and stay involved, or at least continue updating you guys on what they're up to? And like, how does that fit in with kind of what you guys see as the future of what you're doing.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. As of now, there's not a great way for them to do that. I guess the hope would be that the web platform would be that channel, because the web
Mm-hmm.
platform is a place for kids to upload their ideas or their projects they're working on. And once they go on there, they'll be creating a profile, very basic profile that will house all of their projects and ideas. And that'll sort of be like a track record. And one of the things that about the game aspect of it that we feel like could be really valuable for them, is we're kind of seeing that there's a potential for this thing to have later academic merit. Kind of like Boy Scouts, right? That you've had all these experiences and you've gained a certain level within the system, and that relates a lot of knowledge, that you've attained, a lot of experience that you've gained. And so we kind of see that there's maybe a possibility when you work your way up through the sort of levels of the game, that you're essentially gaining these different status levels of thinking about, you're like becoming the sustainability warrior for the planet, and that, maybe, I think schools are already looking for that. And I think even more as they grow up, that's going to be potentially a really valuable thing that's kind of attached to them, as, a recognition of who they are and what they've been learning and experiencing, that could be really valuable. And so that's kind of maybe just a way for them to sort of, be tracking their own like progress in this, and it being helpful back for them. And for us to kind of see what's going on. But yeah, I mean, that's something that we should certainly think more about. I think is how do we make it so that it feels like the story is still continuing for them, and it's and that they're still connected with us. And since the platform's not up right now, a lot of the students we visited, I feel like this is not in place yet. But
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's what the hope is, that the platform will do that.
Gotcha. So can I ask what your timeline is like for completing the film, and kind of, do you have a vision for what you'll kind of do after that? Would you maybe do some kind of like continuous update as far as, like future smaller episodes, or, like once the film is kind of built out and you're able to push that out, what do you see a next step after that? Or is it kind of, just getting more of a feel for what's happening at the time and then kind of going from there?
Yeah, well, the timeline, I think, is shifting.
Yeah, as it always does.
Yeah. We intend to have the film out in 2017, probably towards like fall, winter of 2017, I would guess. We're still waiting on funding for the film to come in fully, and so the sort of tentative schedule is that we would be traveling and filming a lot of these places and hanging out with kids and capturing more ideas this fall school year coming up, and that then all of next year we'd be doing all the post-production. There's going to be a lot of animation in the film, because we're going to animate a lot of ideas that kids have. So we're going to try to really transition from this sort of real world into this very creative world in a very natural way, so that we can showcase some of these ideas, in a very inspiring way, hopefully. And so part of that is that a lot of the animations we see that we're going to do, a lot of these ideas could actually be made into shorter little episodes, or they could be made into a shorter length version that is for, say, younger kids in classrooms. That could be part of our curriculum package, as opposed to the full length documentary that is like has a lot of talking heads and stuff. And then it's hard to say really what the next step is beyond that. I think that certainly it's open to other like continued example series or something like this. But yeah, it's kind of hard to see right now. I think we kind of got a lot in front of us with the future and the platform, and
Yeah.
um, and I think just kind of like it's done already, where once we've gotten to a certain place, it kind of opens up the other doors that feel most probable to walk through, and I think that'll happen again at some point. It'll kind of show itself as to where it wants us to take it. I think at a certain point it kind of has a life of its own, and you just got to kind of follow it, and so that's, I think, what we're going to be looking to do, is just let it show us what the next step is.
Cool. So can I ask, are you kind of freelancing on the side in order to, get by? Because I think a lot of times people don't fully understand what type of resources go into projects like this off the bat, and kind of how hard you have to work in order to juggle not only surviving yourself, but also putting your time into this passion project that, can really keep you going before you're able to devote more time to that. And, sometimes these projects get to the point where you have to dump some other things that might be keeping you afloat in order to, devote more time to what you're trying to do there.
Yeah.
So what does that kind of look like for you, and, how have you kind of navigated that situation?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet about my life is that I live very cheaply. I live in the forest in a studio that I built myself. That's what I'm in right now.
That's awesome.
And yeah, and so my cost of living is pretty low, and it doesn't require me to make a whole lot of money. But I do freelance on the side, and one of the things that has been actually really helpful in floating a lot of this is that I have a relationship with a Chinese production company, and they hire me to film for them. So every year for the past 4 years, I've gone there for 30 to 40 days and just worked solidly on cinematography for them. And so that allows me just to go away for a bit and make a chunk of money while still gaining skills, and then come back here and live very cheaply and invest a lot of my time and money now into this project. And then I do have some other small freelance gigs on the side here and there that I do for, like you've seen on my website, other small film projects that I do. And I like for them to be things that I care about, things that I feel like are, good, sort of social responsibility stuff. But if it can be.
Definitely. That's awesome. Yeah. And I had kind of, played with the van life for a little bit there on the coast. And I think a lot of people don't really realize how difficult that type of lifestyle can be, just trying to live a little bit more closer to your means. You really have to juggle your time with, the resources that you have available. And I think it's really cool that, people like you are kind of living the entire teaching very holistically, and really incorporating everything that you're trying to do into your own life. Because I think one of the reasons why a lot of teachings in general don't stick with kids as they're growing up is they're seeing people telling them something, and then they're watching them live their life in a different way. And it's like, they're not stupid. They're seeing the disconnect where it's like, okay, you're telling me to do this, but you're going and doing something completely different. So why would I listen to anything that you have to say,
Yeah, definitely. That was a big part of it, I think, too, for us on the bike trip, was that, we were coming in there on bicycles, and, we were pulling all of our gear. And that was huge for so many of the kids, because they knew that we were real. They could see that we had just cycled, 500, 1,000, 1,500 miles, to tell them that this is possible. We didn't just drive up in a car. And that, I think, was very powerful for so many kids. That was some of the feedback that we got. That was one of the most, like, dominant ones, was like, like, wow, like I can't believe you guys did that. I feel like you're really like, walking the talk there. And that, I think that was really powerful for them to see. And so I certainly agree with you. Like there can definitely be a disconnect in, uh, in what we all want and in what we like are saying that we want to live like, and then how we're actually living. And I totally understand it. I get it. It's hard to do that, unless you like just find yourself in the right circumstances. But the system is set up for, for you to be a part of it. And
Mm-hmm.
being a part of it usually means that it's sacrificing something. It's either sacrificing the health of the planet, or it's sacrificing the well-being of others. And that's, it's obviously a very unfortunate and just very strange aspect about the time that we live in. I mean, it's literally like every time I go into a grocery store, I'm like, do I want that hummus? Like I want to eat it, but I don't want that plastic container to have to like travel, to wherever in China it's got to go to be recycled, and all the fuel it's going to waste, and, put, those compounds into the air, like, is it really worth it? And it's hard because it's all disconnected, right? It's all disconnected from our view. And so it's hard to really like believe that all that is happening. And so I don't know. I'm certainly, I'm not perfect in any of that. I still eat hummus. But
Yeah.
I think if we can, yeah, the more that we can try to do it, the more that we can. And I found that it's really enjoyable. Like I think it connects back into the fear thing. That there's a lot of unknowns involved with sort of like jumping more out of these set up environments that we have for us. And so of course the unknown is can be kind of scary. Like I guess one of the things that I could relate is, like not having central heating and air. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's like this is a totally unnecessary thing of our culture that, for most places in the country. And a lot of it has to do with just like improper design, design that was just based on cost efficiency and cheapness of materials and time, and wasn't thinking about, the longevity and like energy use and any of that stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you can build things that don't require something like that, and are still a relatively comfortable environment. But the other option is just that you adapt, like that you just are okay with a little bit colder conditions sometimes, and you're okay with just a little bit warmer conditions. And, that's what clothes are for. That's what blankets and sleeping bags are for, and it just becomes the new norm. And I think that's really what's going to happen, is that all of these things that we've gotten used to, that are the norm, are, as they fade away, like it's just going to become the new norm that we don't have those things, and it won't feel weird at all, after a very brief moment. And in some cases it feels better. It's like, for me, like I know what's going on outside even when I'm inside, because my home is tiny. It's 100 square feet, and there's no, I know what temperature it is outside for the most part. It's insulated, but and I can hear everything that's going on. I know what the sky is doing at night, and like all of these things that you're kind of blocked off from, just as an example, and now because I've done away with certain things, I have like reestablished a connection with these other things that I didn't even realize in some ways I think were helpful for the health of my psyche and my being.
Yeah, and that brings me to thinking about, I think it was a quote that Terence McKenna had mentioned, where he was talking about how throwing yourself initially, when you decide to kind of throw yourself into the abyss, you think of it as, you're going into this hell, and then once you kind of make the leap, you realize that it's a giant feather bed. Is there any kind of, I guess, decisions that you made in your life where you've been faced with, wanting to do something and being kind of scared, and then just kind of jumping into it and being like, wow, okay, I've adapted pretty easily. This is totally okay.
Yeah, I think many times I've jumped into the abyss, um, and every time it's worked out, and every time it gets easier, to jump into the abyss.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been a big draw for me too, to working towards like what I'm doing now, and to working with kids. And one of the things that we used to do at the camp was send kids off of zip lines and off of rope swings up in the trees, and you're working through that process with them in a very real sense of, you got to jump into the abyss, and it seems scary, but sometimes taking a risk is very rewarding. And so you go through this whole process with them of like calming them down, focusing on their breathing, and of like really grounding them in the sense that, hey, like, we're just right here. We're in the forest, we're hanging out, we're just in this body, getting to experience this stuff, and we might as well try to experience things while we're here. And I, one of the things, maybe I could relate a couple examples when I jumped into the abyss. I mean, I think buying a shuttle bus, that when I left New York, I just jumped into a bus. I had a lot of things going in New York, and I could have stayed, and I was starting a business there, and I was just starting to really work my way into like a position that I liked in the film industry, which was prop fabrication. And it was, more lucrative, and I was just starting to like really feel like I was making connections, but I just knew that something just wasn't there for me. And I think, yeah, I just kind of dropped, I stopped the business thing, which was difficult because it was with a partner. And,
Mm-hmm.
I just had to explain, like, I have to do this. I don't know why. And so I did, and it just all, again, it all just all worked out. It all just kind of became the wave that I wanted to be in, and I think I think it's because, when you're jumping into an abyss, you're jumping into a place that is like mysterious, that you can't see the bottom of, that's dark, right? So you're going to find something new down there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of why it works out, is because even if there's some trials involved, like ultimately you have understood the universe just a little bit more. And there's something that, is like a very, it's like an embedded sense of purpose in that, in that, by just trying these new things, by taking these leaps, and then you see, it just opens it up. It opens up the world to acceptance. I think it opens up the world to like not holding on, not clinging,
Mm-hmm.
and life is much easier when you're not clinging. I guess one of the things that I've heard that I could relate this to is that I liked a lot, had to do with, and I'm not too sure about this connection. I haven't quite figured it out fully, but it talks about belief versus faith, right? And it was saying that belief, let's say you're in the water and you believe that you're not going to drown, and so you're swimming and you're paddling and you're staying above the water. But after a while, you might tire out and you might drown. But if you have faith that you're not going to drown, that would be like, lying on your back and just floating, and you're not going to tire out from that, And I think jumping into the abyss is kind of like more in the moving into the floating way of experiencing the universe. And I think that's going to always lead you to the place you're supposed to be.
definitely. Do you see any kind of pushback or any kind of realizations coming from more of the teacher aspect when you come into these classrooms, and maybe the teacher is not seeing any progress with the kids, and you come in and in a half day, they're kind of lighting up and you're instilling some change in them that lasts for a longer period? Do you see any change in the teachers? Like maybe they've been in the system a little too long and they've kind of, you know, accepted or settled for the norm of what's going on in their classroom, and then all of a sudden you come in and they've, maybe found something in the kids that they recognize in themselves. Because I think that's kind of what might help continue the process of the kids learning is, the teacher is a byproduct of what you're trying to teach the kids, and they're kind of seeing that change in themselves at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Some teachers more than others we really connect with. And I'm not really sure if there's, it's, I do think about it sometimes, like, is this, are we like stepping on this teacher's toes in any way?
Mm-hmm.
But I think most cases we have teachers that are just extremely appreciative of this experience because, they, excuse me, they spend a lot of time with these kids. And even if they are trying to present some of these ideas to these kids, the kids are already a little bit jaded just by the fact that they're around this person all the time. And so to have somebody totally new and fresh, like come in,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody that, is just getting to know these kids for the first time, that's a new opportunity for them to sort of reinvent themselves in a way, each kid. And I think that adds a lot to the experience. And then also, I think maybe, our age, we're like a little younger than a lot of teachers, and that may have something to do with it. But yeah, we see teachers that send us stuff that are like, hey, like, look what we installed a rain catchment this year, like, check it out. And they're like really stoked about it and they wanted to share it with us, and like teachers certainly in some cases like get sort of re-inspired. They're like, I've always like, I've been trying to do this as much as I can. And they're just really stoked to see their kids like get fired up about it again. So.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's been about an hour and a half now. I think it's kind of reaching the peak podcast time. I think people kind of start to drop off after this.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been an awesome talk, dude. I'd love to have you on again.
Yeah,
if
that'd be
there's
great.
some other ideas.
Yeah.
Is there any shout outs you want to give, or where can people find the school's sustainability stuff or your projects in general if they want to check out more?
Sure. I mean, the website for SOS is schoolsofsustainability.com, and they can find a lot of information on there. They can see a little teaser video that we put together, which is a lot of stuff we filmed on our bike trip. Yeah, and if they have any questions or comments, they can always write us through that. Website has many different channels for connecting with us. And yeah, I think that's probably the only one that I'll give a shout out for.
Awesome. If somebody wants to kind of support the cause a little bit more or help out, is there anything an individual can do to help support the cause?
Well, I mean, we're always looking to connect with people. So, if anyone has an idea or has like a school or a classroom or kids in mind that they think would benefit from this, they should contact us. Of course, we're always looking for funding to make this kind of thing happen, which can help pay for schools that can't afford it as much. On our bike trip, and we still do, we give workshops to schools regardless of their ability to pay. And then some schools that can pay can help fund for others. And of course, other donations can pay for certain things just to help us keep afloat and make this thing happen. So
Awesome. Are you looking for schools in California in general, or just kind of anywhere that might be open to accepting some new ideas?
Yeah, I mean anywhere. I think the more connections we have, the better. The more people involved in the conversation, and certainly it's as of right now, it's a lot easier for us to get to schools in California to give
Yep.
workshops. But maybe there's a school out there that down the road would be able to come visit, or during the film process, if there's like somebody knows of a school that they feel like is a great example of sustainability, that they feel like or just an incredibly emergent way of teaching, that they think is awesome, then they should let us know about it. We're still looking for places to showcase to the world, so that's welcome.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'll once I stop this recording and we get the video up and then the podcast going, I'll shoot you some links and we'll go from there.
Great. Thanks so much, Nick. It's been great
Awesome.
chatting with you.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of your day, man.
All right. You too.
Take it easy.
Cheers.
Peace.